Okay, this is episode 3 of Books and Beer, where we talk about books and beer, primarily while drinking beer, or our beverage of choice. Mine does happen to be beer of all different kinds. So if you don't have a Twitch account, and you want to still be able to ask questions, then the place to do that would be on our Discord. And I do have a Discord channel. It is just chat. But it is there if you choose to log into that and ask questions there. All you need is a free Twitch account in order to go ahead and be able to participate in chat on Twitch itself. But if you're not comfortable doing that, or if you don't have a way to set up a Twitch account, you can go into Discord and get in that way. In addition, the first 2 episodes are now up on YouTube. They are under Books and Beer, not Books and Beers. There is another podcast, or another channel that has the same name, that has like 15 episodes, I think, up. And that is not this one. So it's Books and Beer. And you will see the nice little graphic that we're using on the screen to be able to recognize that. So today's beer is from Dogfish Head in Milton, Delaware. It is their let's see if I can, Flesh and Blood IPA. Okay. Dogfish Head markets themselves as off-centered ales for off-centered people. For the most part, I have found that to be true. This beer is a 7.5 alcohol by volume. So compared to what I've had on the last 2 episodes, it's a little bit lower for the most part. Just to start off with, I generally do not like IPAs. They are my least favorite of all the different styles, at least so far. And the reason I don't like most of them is because they were primarily made with hops that were very resinous, very piney, and to me they tasted like pine cleaner. That has changed over the last several years. And many of them have gotten better, but for a long time I would actually say that I hated IPAs, and I can't say that any longer, thanks to a couple of breweries and one particular beer goddess at the Austin Flying Saucer before it closed. I like citrus and floral hops, and this particular IPA is described as a well-hopped IPA brewed with orange peel, lemon flesh, and blood orange juice. So there should be a fair amount of citrus in there. And so we're going to see how this one goes. But if I make an awful face when I take my first drink, you'll understand why. Alright, so it is darker than most IPAs. It looks more like an amber. Still getting a lot of piney in the aroma, but I think kind of getting the citrus peel, the orange peel. Okay, this may be a drinkable one. I don't think it'll be one I'll have very often, but it is, at least on first taste, the citrus is up front, and then the pine comes through. So we'll see how that goes as we talk a bit. Okay, so I have been on what they call work and safety leave for about the last 2 months. They weren't able to have me telework, and they basically evacuated the buildings, so I was on health and safety leave. I have, as of this week, been informed that I am going back to work at the building on June 1st. They were trying to get us to set up for telework, but they did not have enough computers. So that means I'm going to be going back to work, and I work swing shift, so I work from 4:30 p.m. to 1 a.m. That's really not going to change my schedule a whole lot. Although it does mean that during the week, if I'm streaming gaming, it may be when I get home if I don't have time to stream before I have to go to work, because I do have to leave for work earlier. Okay. But we'll see how that goes. It may give me a more set schedule, so I may actually end up streaming more as far as games. And I haven't streamed any of my arts and crafts stuff yet because I still haven't gotten my phone set up to be a second camera. So. As far as what I was saying, so the episodes are up on YouTube. That is because I am a minnow in a big pond on Twitch, and they will only hold on to my streams for 2 weeks before they delete them. So I have moved, what I'm doing is I export them over to YouTube. And there is a stream for Books and Beers, a playlist for Books and Beers. There's a playlist for my Final Fantasy VII original and remake streams. And I'll probably set up another playlist or two, depending on what other games I play that I stream. Now, if I ever get to the point of being an affiliate, then they would hold on to them for 60 days. Twitch would hold on to them for 60 days before deleting them. But at the moment, that is not the case. It's only 14 days, so I just got episode 1 in, and I barely managed to do that. But it is there, along with episode 2, and I have to wait 24 hours, but after 24 hours, I can go ahead and export this to YouTube. So this will be on Twitch for 14 days, but by Tuesday it will also be up and part of the playlist on YouTube if you miss it. That'll also help me keep track of what beers I've talked about and which beers I haven't. All right. So, what have I been reading? I read another one of the essays or letters on the Shortness of Life by Seneca. I generally can only read like one of those at a time. So that's been very slow going. I did decide to keep reading the Valdemar series. At the end of Storm Breaking, all the high levels of magic in that universe had been dispersed pretty much evenly across the face of the planet. So magic basically had changed drastically. And the next trilogy, the Owl trilogy, has to do with some characters who were trying to kind of set things up to get, as magic starts starts to combine or run together. They're trying to kind of direct it in certain ways so that they don't have stagnant magic pools and things like that. So I finished both Owl Flight and Owl Sight, which are the first two books of the trilogy, and I'm about halfway through Owl Night. I will probably finish that tomorrow because I don't think I'm going to read any more of it tonight. But in addition to that, I have been reading through the drafts of my Double Helix novels, and I've been reading them in reverse order. So I started with the 5th book. Now I'm reading, then I read the 4th. I'm reading the 3rd right now. And what I'm trying to do with that is make some notes for revisions and completions, because book 4 is not complete and neither is book 5. But to see running backwards, if I've laid all the tracks that I need, all the hints that I need for the events that happened in the later books, to make sure that I didn't repeat events or repeat characters learning information. And actually, I found out in both the 3rd and 4th books, there's places where characters learn information that they had already known. So that's going to help me figure out where I need to delete that and where they should actually be learning that information. It's been kind of interesting because I wrote the part of the 5th book that I have written. I wrote that back in November, and the 4th book was November of the year before. So and the original very first draft of the 1st book was written back in 2013. And it had to have some major changes to it. At one point, a character who I wasn't going to have show up till the 2nd or 3rd book decided that they needed to be introduced in the first book. In fact, in the second scene in the first book. And so that required a lot of rewriting in the first book. And in fact, the first book is actually already out online on Amazon, but I am going to pull that because I am doing a fairly major revision on it, as well as redoing the cover and a couple of other things. The writing just doesn't hold up to the even the second book, but especially the later books. I have to say, I'm a bit happier than I thought I was going to be with this. It's the resinous, the pine notes hit me fairly hard with the first sip, but it's gotten a lot better already. Which has made it more pleasant to drink for me. It's not as resinous as I thought it was going to be. Let's see, what else? Audio. I have not been good this past week. I haven't exercised. So I have not listened to or started any of the other audiobooks from Queer Eye's Fab 5 yet. Like I mentioned last week, I did finish Naturally Tan, which was Tan France's book. But I haven't started any of the others yet. On the other hand, I did have to run errands on Wednesday. So I did listen to some of Becoming by Michelle Obama. And I got up to the point, I stopped basically at the end of Inauguration Day for President Obama's first inauguration. And it's been interesting to hear how difficult it was at times for them to keep things relatively normal for Malia and Sasha. They went to a great deal of effort and trouble to do that. And I'm looking forward to listening to more of it. That will be the one good thing about going back to work, is I will have my commute, which, depending on how much Austin has reopened, could be anywhere from 25 to 45 minutes to continue listening to that, to Becoming. So when I get done with Owl Night, I may go back to the first book that Mercedes Lackey wrote about the Mage Wars, which basically set everything up for the Mage Winds and Storm series. It's called The Black Griffin, and it's probably one of my favorite books of the Valdemar series. But I may go back and reread that. But I'm also thinking, I have 2 books by V.E. Schwab that I want to read. I've got several books in my to-be-read shelf to read. And I've got some books on my Kindle and on my Kobo reader that I need to read. I also need to spend some more time going back through my online classes for Scrivener, which is the writing software that I use, and for my self-publishing course that I took. I still have access to all the videos, and they've been updated, so I need to go through those again as well and get my mailing list set up properly, because it exists, but it's not set up or linked anywhere at this point. We're going to go backwards a little bit. I'll talk a little bit about Owlflight. Owlflight was the first book in the trilogy, and it is about a young boy who lives in the northern part of Valdemar, basically up on the northern border. And he is, when his parents disappear, they're trappers in the forest, and it's a forest that has been affected by all the magic and strange and dangerous things live in it. So when his parents disappear, the village that he lives in assume that they're dead and apprentice him to the local wizard, who had been trying to get him as an apprentice for a very long time. He doesn't want to be a wizard at this point in time. He knows that magic doesn't work the same way it used to. And the wizard who he's apprenticed to is one who did not have a whole lot of talent to begin with. And during a war was injured and lost almost all of the ability that he had due to a head injury. And so he's a very active, fairly mature kid, because he used to go trapping with his parents, and he doesn't think that there's any use to magic because you can't do anything big with it. So he's always trying to find a way to get out of his magic lessons. And he has a temper tantrum, goes off on his own, and when he gets back, his master decides to send him out to gather up some fungus that basically is just an awful thing to gather up. And he does that, and while he's out, he starts seeing people from the village running towards the river that's at the edge of the forest. And he can't figure out why they're doing it, yelling and screaming and running. And so he's trying to figure out what's going on, and he runs back into town, into the village, and gets there just in time to see his master standing at the middle of a wooden bridge with a bunch of half-human, half-bear creatures and armed soldiers marching onto the bridge. And then the bridge and his master go up in flames. And he turns around and runs for the forest. Once he gets there, he meets up with some more barbarians, some more soldiers, who chase him and eventually catch him and are about to do something with him. He doesn't know, because he can't understand their language, when the barbarian who is holding him suddenly sprouts an arrow in his neck. and he ends up meeting with a Teledras, or a Hawk brother, who is out scouting the area. And if I go any further than that, I'm going to give away the main storyline. But suffice to say, he ends up going back with the Hawk brother to where they're staying. He ends up learning that magic is not as useless as he thought it was, and being convinced to learn to use the magic that he has. And he and his new friends end up basically rescuing the village. And that's Owl Flight. Owl Sight takes place a few years later, actually. I think about 4 years later. And Darian, who's the main character of Owl Flight, has become very familiar with his magic and very comfortable with it. And he is heading back to the area around the village that he came from. He's not going back to the village itself, but he's going back to the general area. The cottage that he used to live in has been taken over by a apprentice healer who has a healing gift, as well as being able to heal with herbs and potions and things like that. And she is having trouble with her healing gift because she's never actually been fully trained in it. So she is trying to stay away from people most of the time. But she and her younger sister go to market, and her sister gets chosen by a companion. And that kind of starts off that story. They get to meet when Darian and his Teledras companions all go to the village to say, yeah, we're here. You don't have to worry about stuff coming out of the forest now. And it's a lot of fun. Owl Night takes place 2 years after Owl Sight, and 2 years? 1 year. No, 2 years, because the healer, Keisha's sister, who got chosen, is coming back to the area as a junior envoy or ambassador to the area. And she managed to speed through her classes. So again, if you're watching from Twitch but you don't have an account or you're not logged in, and you have a question or a comment, I do have a text channel on Discord. You can go to that and ask a question. Or make a comment, or you can do it in the chat room here if you are logged into Twitch. Perfectly happy to shout out to anyone who happens to be in the chat room if they just want to say hi. I like talking to people. It's a lot easier than trying to figure out what to say when no one is saying anything. Especially when what I had noted down to talk about doesn't take me as long as I expected it to. But that is what it is. I'm getting a little bit better at talking to the void, as it may be. I have less trouble doing it when this is just a straight podcast, because I know no one's going to hear it right away anyway. It's a little harder doing it with the webcam on, but I'm learning. And my hope is, before too much longer, to be able to do interviews, remote interviews with people, or at least chats with other people who enjoy reading or listening to audiobooks. Maybe some authors, maybe some brewers. There is a podcast that I listen to that's about finances, where the two guys who actually do the podcast are craft beer enthusiasts, and so they make a point, one of their things that they do is have a beer with each podcast and talk about it at the end of the podcast. So kind of where I got the idea for this. And I think it would be kind of fun to talk to them both about beer and about maybe some financial books that they might recommend. Or maybe even just finding out what they read or listen to for fun. I know one of them just finished the Harry Potter series because he's got kids and he's been reading it to them. And but I don't remember what the other one's been reading, or if they mentioned specifically what it was they've been reading. Now, I do still need to get a copy of Discord for Dummies. That I have been told by a good source, like the source that wrote it, that will tell me how I can get a second audio and or video feed in my stream, so that I can actually remotely interview and talk to people on Discord and have it stream here on Twitch. I'm thinking I could get it instantly if I did it through Kobo or Amazon. I could get the ebook instantly, but I may just go ahead and have my local bookstore ship it to me. And since T is currently working on the 4th edition of Podcasting for Dummies, I'll wait till that comes out before I get the print version. I've got the e-version of the 3rd edition. And I have the print version of the 1st edition. It's my reference shelf. Has a lot of stuff on it right now that I haven't used in a while. Like stuff for coding websites. Need to get back into doing that as well. I haven't done that in way too long. But that is pretty much where I am. There's another nonfiction book that I'm reading that is basically branding for authors, and I'm kind of reading that a chapter at a time, and I think I'm about halfway through. It's a fairly good book as far as being a how-to, but I mean, it's fairly straightforward on things to do, just not exactly how to do them. It's got some good suggestions in it, but I haven't found it as helpful as I had hoped it would be. I'm kind of wanting to reread some of my other works in progress that aren't in the Double Helix universe, but I really need to get the Double Helix books out before I start on something else, because they are an actual series, and the ones that I want to read are, I think, primarily one-offs. One basically standalone books that are in different series. It doesn't help that my brain has been trying to start the next Double Helix series, even though I haven't completely finished and published the first Double Helix series. And so a lot of when I'm getting ready, when I'm trying to get to sleep, or when I remember a dream, it's usually a piece from the next Double Helix series, which I really don't want to start yet because I'd like to write something different. I've been writing the Double Helix books for going on 7 years now, and I would like a break. I still have some short stories to finish up that I haven't done yet, and there's some short story collections in the Double Helix series that I want to write as well. I'm hoping that going back to work and having that set schedule will get me back into a pattern where I am able to do more writing and hopefully get that stuff out so that I can get started on some other things. Because there's a steampunk book. There is a paranormal romance. There's a fantasy portal story. There's several short stories about a family of gods where the god of death and the god of war are brothers and they don't like each other and they're constantly getting into fights. And that may or may not tie into another story that has to do with the goddess of inspiration and creativity, and some problems that she has with the goddess of greed and the god of entropy. So those should be interesting if I ever get to those. There are some other short stories that I'm working on, or I would like to be working on, and haven't gotten to, but the ideas are there, and I've got notes for them. What else? Oh, there's the Bard's Stories. That's a series. There is the God of Misfits Stories, which has nothing to do with the family of gods or the goddess of creativity and the goddess of greed. It's completely different. It's set in, I think it's pretty much set in the same universe that the Bard stories are, but in a completely different part of the world. What else is there? I have way too many projects as far as writing goes, more than I will ever be able to write. Which is kind of frustrating, because you would think if I have more than I can write as it is, that my brain would not bother to give me more ideas. That is not the case. My brain has indeed decided that I can always use another idea. And it literally has gotten to the point where my brain, as I'm trying to fall asleep, will go, hey, what about this? And I'll go, no, I'm going to sleep now. And then it'll try again. And I'll say, no, I'm going to sleep now. And I don't worry about whether or not I'm going to forget that idea. If it's a good idea, if it has legs, it's going to stick with me, and I'll remember it in the morning, or I'll remember it a couple days later. And I'll go, oh yeah, I had that idea, and I'll jot down the notes for it. But I don't have enough time to write what I've got. Maybe if I'd made some more progress writing now, it would be different. But this whole pandemic thing has actually made it more difficult to write, even though I technically had the time to do it. Because my brain cycles are just being used up trying to deal with the pandemic life. So it is what it is. Could be worse. I've gotten a little bit of stuff done. I've started doing my revisions again. I have a friend who's an editor who's currently not working, and so I'm hoping that when I do start doing the revisions again, she'll be available to help me out with the revisions and do some editing for me. And once I send the first Double Helix book revision to her for editing, then I'll go ahead and pull it off of Facebook, or not Facebook, pull it off of Amazon, so that I can re-release it after it's been edited. There are some typos in there that I need to get to anyway, and like I said, I'm just not happy with the quality of the writing compared to the later books, so it's going to have a substantial revision, not so much in the content, but in the phrasing. Right. Just seeing if there's anything in the Discord. There's nothing in the Discord. Alright, so I have to say, as evidenced by the fact that I have actually drank most of this, and IPAs are the one style that I will often leave anywhere from a third to a half of the glass undrunk. But this one actually, I am enjoying. It was better than I thought it was going to be. It's definitely darker, and that's going to have to do with the blood orange juice that they used in it. but it's more citrusy than it is resinous or piney, and so it's actually better than I thought it was going to be. It would probably be really good with fish or chicken or anything fried. So if I were eating dinner and it was something that was going to be fried and greasy or really fatty, this would be really good to go with that. It would cut that fat and grease very nicely. I'm just waiting for my cat to decide she's going to walk across the back of my chair or decide to walk right in front of me while I'm trying to do this. She's been known to do that on more than one occasion. So far, she seems content to stay up in her little hideaway on top of the bookshelves. Let's see, what else? I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of books that aren't coming out that were supposed to be coming out right now because with the bookstores closed, the major publishers just aren't releasing the books that they normally would be sending to the bookstores. You would think that they would at least release the e-versions, but in a lot of cases they've chosen not to. So I really don't know what is currently out. I can tell you that if you're looking for a diverse set of books with strong women in fantasy and or sci-fi, you can go to sirensconference.com. I think it's .com. Give me just a second to double check that, because I could be wrong and it could be .org. Come on. Yeah, it's .org. Okay. They have reading lists for the current year and previous years on the site. And while some of the books have not necessarily been to my taste, they've all been very well written. At this point in time, that conference is still scheduled to happen in October. And basically, they are dedicated to discussing and celebrating women and non-binary people in fantasy literature, and to the premise that every voice, whether they're reader, scholar, librarian, educator, publisher, or author, has valid and valuable thoughts to share. Their theme this year is villains, which I think is going to be a lot of fun. If I'm not mistaken, there has already been one or more proposals for presentations / panels on things like the Maleficent and Maleficent 2 movies that Disney did, basically looking at why different takes on villains, especially female villains. So I think it's going to be very interesting. At this point in time, they're still on. They haven't canceled or postponed this year's conference yet. Since my trip to New Zealand has been postponed, it looks like I'm going to actually have the leave to be able to go to Sirens this year, and so I'll be doing my best to make an effort to do that. I wasn't able to go last year, and I missed it more than I thought I would. So we're going to try to do that. See what else is going to be going on. It's going to be interesting because I am not, for other reasons, going to be teaching at work. Normally at that point in time, I am teaching or preparing to teach the new hires at work. And for a couple of different reasons, I'm not going to be able to do that this year. Among them being a family vacation that is going to be about 10 to 12 days long. So, and then another one that's going to be about another week, that's going to be in January. So, it will be a little bit odd not to be teaching during that time of the year, because normally starting in August or September, I start prepping to teach new hires, and then we start teaching them generally the end of October, middle to end of October to middle of November, and they generally go through the end of January, and sometimes as long as February if they started later. So normally what I'm doing is teaching all that time, or prepping to teach all that time. And I won't be doing that this year unless our training coordinator decides that it's okay for me to be gone for essentially 3 weeks out of the training. But we will see what happens. Work is going to be interesting. The only reason I'm being called back to go into the office is because Texas reopened. I would much rather be working from home. If I'm going to have to work, I would rather not have to go into the office. There's nothing that I do that I couldn't do from home if they had the equipment to allow me to work from home. And because I'm not currently working on phones, they do not have that equipment available for me because I'm not a priority. So I will be going back in unless something changes between now and then, which is definitely possible. But I will be doing that Monday through Friday, 4:30 p.m. to 1 a.m. So it should not change the schedule for this. Books and Beer should still stream at 7 p.m. Central on Sundays, and hopefully be up on YouTube by the end of the day on Tuesday, because I do have to give it that 24 hours, and that would put me at work when that 24 hours hit. So I'd have to put it up on Tuesday before I go to work. Alright, I am out of things to talk about for today. Well, no, I'm not out of things to talk about. I'm just out of things to talk about that are appropriate for this podcast. Never out of things to talk about. So I am going to go ahead and sign off. Please join me again next week. I will try to have a little bit more about other people's books than I did this week. I talked a lot about my own books this week, so I'll try to have a little bit more about other people's books next week. In the meantime, do some reading of your own, or some listening of your own if you prefer audiobooks. And if you don't happen to be a fan of beer, enjoy your books with whatever your beverage of choice is. Cheers. See you next week.